Thank you so much for the warm welcome. As a sixth-generation Michigander and as the daughter of a proud Spartan, it's really great to be here at MSU. I really want to thank Professor Tarabara and professors here tonight, as well as the Center for European and Eurasian Studies and the MSU Department of History, and also James Madison College for organizing this event, and for all of you for being here. I want to say it's a real honor to join you for this year's lecture series, so aptly named The Rise and Persistence of Authoritarianism. Is Democracy in Peril? I'll be curious to hear your answer to that question. This topic is really personal to me, and it's important to us all, and it couldn't be more timely. Not only is it the question of our time, democracy versus autocracy, and I think Anne Applebaum and other authors Mike McFall and others are writing about this now. But what happens in Europe also has a profound impact on the United States. Europe is home to our oldest allies and is our biggest trading partner, with $1.5 trillion of trade in 2024 alone. This trade fuels more than 15 million jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. I've had the great honor to dedicate my life to serving our country, to defending and supporting U.S. interests through a 28-year career in the U.S. Foreign Service. My service was largely in support of the enduring values of freedom and the independence of Europe and Greater Europe, advancing the strategic national security goal of a Europe whole, free, and at peace. This decades-long bipartisan effort came out of the devastation of World War II and continued with the establishment of our foundational security alliance, NATO, and Europe's economic partnership, the EU. The goal was to support the rise of democratic partners to help us solve global crises, open new markets for U.S. businesses and goods, and pursue strategic priorities, promoting the prosperity and defense of the people of the United States. I've witnessed firsthand, from Belgrade to Tbilisi to Kyiv, both the fragility and the resilience of our democratic ideals, and know that the work of protecting democracy is never finished. And it depends on a single idea, that the power is vested in the people, who bestow it through their voice and their vote. It depends on a few key principles, including separation of powers, rule of law, and an independent judiciary, professional and strong institutions, informed and active citizens, and a free press, among others. But today, Vladimir Putin and other adversaries oppose the values that have been foundational to the security and prosperity of our own nation, specifically freedom and democracy. These values helped America become and remain the strongest power in the world. And they are the values we must continue to stand for every day, at home and abroad. Tonight, I would like to share a few lessons from that journey, from my journey. Lessons learned not in textbooks, but on the ground, in moments of crisis and uncertainty. I want to explain my belief that American leadership, grounded in our enduring values, remains indispensable to our own success and to the success of our friends and our allies. And most importantly, I hope that one message comes from this lecture, that each and every one of us has the agency and ability to make an impact to achieve this legacy goal. Each and every one of us, each and every one of you. First, my story and how I got here. My diplomatic career concluded with the honor of a lifetime as the first female U.S. ambassador to serve in a war zone, leading America's on-the-ground response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the biggest threat to European peace and security since World War II. But that's not where my story starts. The values that guided me on this path were instilled in me right here in Michigan. 6 generations ago, my family came to Eaton County. Both of my grandfathers proudly served in the Army during World War II. They showed me the value of serving our country in pursuit of our ideals. There's a story that goes back in our family about how my paternal grandfather, an Army captain and medical doctor who treated General Dwight Eisenhower and cleared the way for General Eisenhower's promotion to a 4-star general before he led the D-Day invasion in Normandy, which helped end World War II. And my maternal grandfather met my grandmother at an ice cream shop right here in Lansing. My mom was just a newborn when my grandfather left them and his job at the Oldsmobile plant and their house in Easttown to serve our country, to fight against fascism in World War II. I was raised by my mom, the first in her family to go to college. And to make ends meet, we lived with my grandparents. And I was lucky to attend Michigan public schools. And as a result, I was given a great opportunity to follow my dreams. After working my way through college with the help of scholarships and loans, I joined the U.S. Foreign Service at the age of 27, and I proudly served 28 years under 5 presidents, Democrat and Republican. My first post was in Belgrade, Serbia, working to end the wars in the Balkans in the 1990s. At one point, my boss told me, "I need you to report on Kosovo." We were in Belgrade, and Kosovo was about a 4-hour drive away. It was a restive province, and there was conflict between the Serbs and the ethnic Kosovars. He said, "This is going to be hard. If you need anything, let me know." He threw a large flak jacket and an oversized helmet on my desk and walked out the door. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I was ready to put my skills to the test, and I was tested. In those days, we drove around conflict zones in unarmored vehicles, or soft skins as we called them. And I learned that you can't hear the sound of artillery if you are in an armored vehicle. You need to be in a soft skin with the windows down. At that time, the Serbs were committing war crimes against the Kosovars, and I was often the first diplomat on the scene, reporting on these horrific atrocities. Families killed, mutilated, and left on their front lawns. It's a picture in your mind you can never forget. Houses and lives destroyed with a malice and effort I did not know existed. Destruction everywhere, not just by accident, but deliberate. In ransacked homes, even the sinks were destroyed, leaving water running constantly, furniture strewn about the yard, cars with windows smashed, tires slashed. I'd studied the concepts of justice and injustice. That's what brought me into the Foreign Service. But I had never known or felt what they really meant. It was a heavy responsibility to bear for a young and inexperienced Foreign Service officer, fresh out of graduate school and training. I joined the Foreign Service to make a difference, not bear witness to horror. I told my boss, "I did not sign up for this." He gently put his arm on my shoulder and said simply, "Yes, you did. You just didn't know it." I never forgot that advice. Later, I became the youngest diplomat to attend and support the negotiations to end the war between Serbia and Kosovo in Rambouillet, France. This hard and brutal experience in the wars of the Balkans is where I fell in love with diplomacy and saw how diplomats could play an active, hands-on role to end wars and to advance our enduring values to our benefit and to the benefit of others around the world. It's also where I saw firsthand how American leadership matters. And that's a lesson I've taken across the globe through posts in Georgia, the Obama White House, Uzbekistan, the State Department, Slovakia, and finally, Ukraine. But why is American leadership so important? Because democracy is fragile and requires constant work at home and abroad. When I joined the Foreign Service in the 1990s, there was an optimistic mood across Europe. The Berlin Wall had fallen, and the Iron Curtain of communism was coming down. People from the Balkans to the Baltics were embracing democratic institutions, reforming economies, and building independent media and civil societies. Many of these countries experienced rapid development and prosperity, including East Germany, Poland, the Czech Republic. Others struggled with remnants of communist rule, single-party states, security services with too much power, weak rule of law, and no free media. They also faced the challenge of an aggressive neighbor, Russia, whose goal was to fuel conflicts in the region, conduct hybrid warfare, and spread disinformation and keep these young democracies unstable and weak. These factors resulted in the rise of autocrats, promising stability while silencing critics, enriching themselves and their allies through corruption, and rewriting constitutions to keep themselves in power. Throughout my career, I saw up close what happens when countries have leaders who manipulate truth, when institutions collapse, and when neighbor turns on neighbor, and what can happen literally anywhere in the world. Years later, as ambassador to Slovakia, from outside my office window in Bratislava, I saw the first ever demonstrations outside the US Embassy. Just to repeat, Slovakia is a NATO ally and an EU member. But it was fueled by disinformation and narratives designed to erode support for the alliance between Europe and America. They were protesting against a defense agreement between our two countries. This is a country that made a profound democratic choice during the sweeping movements for freedom in the 1980s. It chose to join the European Union and NATO in 2004, a decision that anchored its future firmly within the democratic community of nations. Even there, 20 years later, the challenge persisted, and Russia's influence operations continued to destabilize the country. A lifetime of fighting for freedom in Europe has taught me that authoritarianism feeds on weakness and grows when truth becomes negotiable, and people stop believing their voices matter, and the powerful are not held accountable. Democracy is resilient, but it's not automatic. It depends on people who are willing to defend it, even when it is difficult, even when it is unpopular. But nowhere has that been more clear than in Ukraine. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, experts, analysts, and journalists all predicted Kyiv would fall within days. But that did not happen. The people of Ukraine stood their ground. Russia's war didn't begin in 2022, as you all probably know. In 2014, Russia sent little green men, soldiers without insignia, but equipped and trained by the Russian military, to seize Crimea and ignite conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine, the Donbas region. And for over a decade, Ukraine and its partners, including the United States, invested enormous effort to pursue a peaceful resolution to this conflict. But this was met with continued Russian aggression and a Kremlin and a leadership that viewed Ukraine's independence as a historic mistake. Despite facing the largest land war in Europe since World War II, murder of over 10,000 civilians, including some 700 children, devastating destruction, thousands of child abductions, 150,000 war crimes and atrocities, and an existential threat to Europe's security. Today, after nearly 1,400 days of Russian attacks, the majority of Ukraine remains in Ukrainian hands. Here's a bit about my experience there. I arrived in Kyiv at the end of May, during the very first months of Russia's full-scale invasion. And we arrived by driving more than 12 hours from Poland in our heavily armored vehicle. We passed through checkpoints and bombed out Russian tanks. The US had not had a confirmed ambassador in Ukraine for over 3 years. In May of 2022, the US presence consisted of myself and 9 other diplomats working to reopen the embassy, which had closed 3 months before. And when embassies close, they're taken down in a way to protect our national security. So things that are sensitive are removed or destroyed. So when we arrived at our embassy, we literally had nothing that you could plug into the wall. Not a computer. And not having things that you need to do your job was an unexpected challenge in the first few days and weeks that we reopened our mission in Kyiv. Not only were we coming back into a war zone, we didn't have a functioning operating embassy. And embassies are usually reopened in times of peace, not in conditions of war. That first year we were in Kyiv, Ukraine did not have any US air defense, no Patriots or other advanced American systems. And as a result, we were in the same situation as everyone else in the country. So when the air raid alerts went off, we had to make sure we had everybody in a place that was the safest possible, and that was underground. And with thousands of Russian missiles and drones coming at Ukraine over those 3 years, we had many close calls. The first massive missile attack included strikes just 2 blocks from where we lived. I didn't tell Washington this. Later, shrapnel from other attacks hit the building we were in itself. And one time, shards of a missile landed in my backyard. On a trip to Odessa, the USAID administrator and I held a meeting in a port building one day. which was attacked and bombed the very next day, destroyed less than 12 hours after we were there. Later, we gave the Ukrainians air defense, and with this, the Ukrainians defended the capital, and all of us, from Russia's ballistic and hypersonic missiles. Going to Kyiv, I left my family, my husband, who was also a Foreign Service officer, and my 2 teenage sons. Why did I do this job? Because I believed that the US effort to repel Russia's invasion of one of the largest countries in Europe was the most important diplomatic job on the planet. And I was really honored to do it. And during those 3 years, we helped Ukraine fight back, retake half of the territory that Russia had seized, keep Ukraine's energy grid alive over 3 winters of missiles and drones from Russia, and very importantly, keep the economy alive. Ukraine's economy is dependent on exports, and the world is also dependent on the grain, Ukraine's grain, to feed people, especially in food-scarce countries. Over 2 winters, U.S. assistance and expertise helped keep Ukraine's substations working and keep the light, power, and water on for millions of people. But Russia had effectively shut down Ukraine's exports through its Black Sea ports. And I'm so proud, having worked with the Ukrainians, the UN, and the G7, that we went to Odessa to get the exports restarted in agreement with the UN and Russia. This was very early in the war. Despite all the danger, the nightly missiles and drones launched by Putin, and all the challenges, I was a strong proponent to push for permission from Washington to move around the country so we could execute the president's policy. That means outreach to people, those suffering from war, overseeing and checking on weapons and other assistance that we were giving to the Ukrainians, and providing advice and support diplomatically or militarily. And typically that meant moving across the country by train. And despite immense challenges, the Ukrainians have kept their trains on time throughout the war, first to evacuate people, now to transport people and equipment. And moving across the country, especially in the early moments, was so important to me because I'm a big believer in using American power wisely to shape events and shape the environment. So on this trip to Odessa to start the critical Black Sea Grain Initiative, there was a group of 20 of us traveling by train, including the security people traveling with me. And suddenly, I heard my security lead get a call in the next train cabin. It was about 2 in the morning. Him saying, yes, yes, then coming back to me and telling me, there's a missile coming, and it's going to land somewhere near us. And we stopped. And at that point, I hoped and I prayed that my team would be okay and the decision to travel had been the right one. We waited. And at a moment like that, all you can do is wait. 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes went by. And then a jerk, and the train restarted. And we went down to Odessa. Diplomats are not people who sit back and watch what's going on, but shape events toward a larger goal that matches our values and our interests. But in those moments, I really learned more about courage, clarity, and leadership than in any classroom. From my experience in Ukraine, there's 3 main lessons I want to share. First, truth matters. Disinformation is one of Russia's most effective weapons. It aims to confuse, divide, and distract. The antidote to lies is truth, told clearly and consistently. Second, unity matters. Ukraine's strength comes from its people standing together and from a global coalition that refuses to accept aggression. The unity of NATO, the European Union, and the United States has been critical to enable Ukraine's fight for freedom, as well as the fight for freedom in Europe for almost 80 years. Third, leadership matters. Leadership is not about titles, but showing up when it counts. Ukraine's fight is not just about territory, but the right of a sovereign nation to choose its own future. If Putin can successfully withdraw Europe's borders by force, I know he will not stop there. There is a way to end this war, and it is to show strength and cut the funds to Putin's war machine. This means increasing sanctions, seizing $300 billion in Europe and Russian sovereign assets, and using it to buy U.S. weapons, create American jobs, and protect freedom in Europe. Others who share authoritarian ambitions are watching closely, including China And this is why American leadership matters and highlights the role the United States should play. American leadership is not about world domination, but partnership. It's about showing up with our allies and our friends and acting with purpose and in principle. American leadership takes many forms. The unity of NATO, where we stand shoulder to shoulder with Poland, the Baltic states, and Romania to strengthen defenses on NATO's eastern flank. It's our economic statecraft, from the most comprehensive sanctions ever imposed on Russia to investments that reduce Europe's dependence on Russian energy. It's our support for independent media, civil society, anti-corruption reforms that helps nations build strong and independent institutions. During a visit to the city of Dnipro in eastern Ukraine, I toured a hospital known for treating soldiers arriving directly from the front lines. It was my second visit there because I had worked on Ukraine earlier in my career. There, the doctor that leads the clinic, who had known me and had met with me the time I had been there years before, asked if I would meet a young Ukrainian soldier named Mikhailo, who had been gravely wounded just the day before. He insisted to speak with me. I approached him somewhat hesitantly, aware of his pain and a very recent injury. But instead of fear or despair, he offered something else: gratitude. His message to me was simple: please thank the American people for supporting Ukraine. He had every reason to show anger or frustration. Instead, he radiated hope. That moment said something powerful to me about the Ukrainian spirit and about American leadership. When America chooses to lead and leads with our values, we strengthen the forces of stability, security, and freedom. History shows that if and when America steps back, vacuums are filled by aggression and instability, and those are not in our interest. Diplomats serve on the front line of freedom. And as former Secretary of Defense General James Mattis said, if you don't fund diplomacy, then our military will need more bullets. The more we put into diplomacy, the less we need to put into a military budget. We are able to use non-military tools to advance our interests and values, and we always should. Here in Michigan, this all may sound very far away, but really it is not. Europe is our largest trading partner, and Michigan's industries, including our global leading auto industry, relies on stable supply chains, secure markets, and a rules-based order that allows free nations to prosper. The peace and prosperity we enjoy at home is directly tied to stability abroad. American leadership is about protecting and advancing those interests by standing with those who share our values. I believe the only way to secure U.S. interests is to stand up for democracies and to stand against autocrats. Peace at any price is not peace at all. It's appeasement. And history has taught us time and again that appeasement does not lead to safety, security, or prosperity. It leads only to more war and suffering. How we handle this war going on now will speak volumes to our friends and our foes. And for the 80 years since World War II, we have enjoyed peace and prosperity because we have relied on the fundamental principles of supporting democracy and freedom at home and abroad, and working with our friends and allies to stop aggressors from achieving their goals. Undermining these principles is risky for us and for future generations. There will be profound implications for America's safety, security, and prosperity. We must hold fast to who we are, a just, generous, and hardworking people, blessed with a democratic and accountable government, the largest free market economy in the world, and the most powerful military in human history. We must show leadership in the face of aggression, not weakness, not complicity. That means standing strong against aggressors, protecting democracy, and fighting for freedom at home and abroad, to be on the right side of history. When America does not lead the free world, we put ourselves at risk. I may no longer be an American diplomat, but I will never stop believing in the need for American leadership to secure our future and offer the beacon of hope and possibility for every Michigander, every American, and others around the world. This is the America I love, and the one I was proud to serve every single day. I want to leave you with this. As we look to the future, I hope each of you will carry forward the idea that leadership is not reserved for titles or positions. Leadership is the choice we make, the integrity we show, and the respect we extend to others, especially in difficult and hard moments when you don't know what the result will be. American leadership starts with those values. So what I say, stand up and take action when your values are on the line. We're at a critical moment, and we need people who will stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. The challenges our country faces today are immense, but I'm deeply optimistic. Our values endure when we listen, when we stand up for what's right, and when we choose cooperation over cynicism. That spirit of shared responsibility is what strengthens democracy and keeps it alive for the next generation. I grew up right here in Michigan, in a community that values integrity, hard work, and doing the right thing. Those values shaped my belief in service and leadership and guided me every day for almost 30 years in the Foreign Service, doing a job I loved, representing a country I deeply believe in. And so to all the students, especially here tonight, leadership starts in classrooms, communities, and with you. Democracy's story is never finished, but renewed every time people choose freedom over fear, truth over lies. The world still looks to America, not just for power, but for purpose. What we do matters. The future of democracy will not be written somewhere else, but in the decisions that we make, that you make now. The renowned historian, who some of you might also know, and my friend, Professor Timothy Snyder, has a wonderful book. It's called On Tyranny. In it, he gives 20 clear lessons on how to fight back against authoritarianism. There was a time when I was deciding how to handle the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Should I leave the Foreign Service and go public with my opposition to our policy on Ukraine? My husband said just one thing. Remember Timothy Snyder and the last principle. Be as brave as you can be. So I say this now to all of us. Be as brave as you can be. Thank you very much.
I have questions already written on index cards. You can haven't passed them yet to Sam, please do. And if you have questions, but haven't written down yet, index cards, I think my colleague, Professor Peril. All right, over there. You can find index cards in the back. And please write the questions down and pass them to Sam, and we'll pass them over here. And while we're doing this, I'll ask my colleague, Professor Matthew Polly, from MSU Department of History. I know he has a question. I'll ask him to ask the first question today.
Very good. Thank you, Ambassador, for an inspiring talk. It's good to hear historian referenced at the end. Timothy Snyder. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Pauly. I'm an associate professor of history, and I specialize in the history of Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and Russia. Served as a Sal Fellow in the political section in the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv in the early 2000s, so I know the ambassador's residence quite well. And it's amazing to think of the peril that it faced. I also had a Fulbright in Odessa, and I love that city and love that city very much. I'm also a big fan of Timothy Snyder, who I consider a colleague. If you haven't viewed his history of Ukraine online on YouTube, those of you who still have yet to learn Ukrainian history, I encourage you to do so. He uses just a bit of my scholarship, and I'm proud of that. In fact, he spreads the wealth sometimes and says there are other things who know something about the history of Ukraine, although he is a great authority. So I thought I would ask you a question that I think is inspired by the moment that we face right now. You spoke certainly about the notion that Putin will not stop with Ukraine, that there's a necessity of defending the principle of freedom with those who share our values. But I guess I'd like to know, I'm always often put in this position of explaining why this war has consequences for the United States, has consequences for the average American citizen. And so on Sunday, there were explosions on the railway line between Warsaw and Lubin. And Poland faced a new sort of tangible point of evidence that the war is not Ukraine's alone. Poland knows this better than many countries, but the war seems to be reaching even farther into Europe. So I wonder if you might comment on specifics that threaten both European security and American security, and then, if I might, call upon your knowledge of Slovakia and attempt to explain the position of Robert Fico and others in Slovakia and in the Czech Republic and Hungary who argue against giving aid to Ukraine. Why is it that they are backing away from the very position that you outlined in your comments? Thank you.
I think it can be explained, maybe the first question of how is this war broader than just Ukraine? So of course, Ukraine is the immediate, obvious war that's happening, that Putin is conducting. But the military part of this war has affected the entire region. So as you mentioned, in Poland has had missiles and drones fly over and land in Polish territory or Polish airspace, as has Romania, as have the Baltic states. So and the challenge, the danger especially of that is those are all treaty allies of the United States. There are NATO allies. What that means if those countries are at threat, this would go to Brussels and go to a decision at NATO as to how we, who are treaty bound to defend each other, would support their defense. So this gets very close. Right now, there are no US troops in Ukraine. And even when I was there in the embassy, unlike Afghanistan, unlike Iraq, we did not work on a military platform. Every military person that was there worked for me because they were in a diplomatic role, not in a military role. So this, should the United States get involved in a military way with NATO or even bilaterally, would be a very different war than exists right now. The war that we have supported the Ukrainians has been with just weapons and assistance, not with our people. And they, in fact, haven't asked for that. They've asked only for weapons and assistance. We know by the cost of Afghanistan and Iraq that it's much cheaper for the United States to support with weapons and assistance than it is with our sons and daughters, but also with all the costs that when a military deployment has. But this is only one frame of the war. And I think it's important to remember that Putin's goal is much bigger. Putin wants to show that democracies can't survive, that his form of government, which is autocracy or authoritarian, is the kind of government that can survive in his part of the world, which he sees as Russia and really the whole former Soviet Union, which he himself has been very clear to say was a historic mistake for all these countries to become independent. And so he essentially has worked in the 25 or however many years he's been in power to undermine not just the countries in his periphery, even though they're independent states, but all of Europe. So there's the land war that's happening, biggest land war since World War II. That's really scary in itself. But there's also a hybrid war that's happening with disinformation and efforts, not just in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are actually very good at dealing with hybrid warfare because they have dealt with the Russians for a very long time. But the hybrid warfare that is much more unsettling, and this goes to your second question, is the hybrid warfare to try to unsettle other countries of Europe through support and promotion of opposition parties, and especially parties on like the far right, one part of the political spectrum, and to support those. Or to use hybrid warfare, which means disinformation through various channels, to magnify differences in society, magnify when there's debate and problematic issues. We've seen Russia do this all across Europe, not just in Ukraine, all across Europe. We've seen this in America, try to undermine people's confidence in their government, in their democracy, in their vote, in the elections, but try to take away people's belief in the power of the the foundational elements of our democracy. So that's another very big part of Russia's war. And it's very active. In Ukraine, it's played out on Telegram channels and other places as well. And so in America, I feel people don't always realize what's happening at a scale that you can't even believe, where you have houses of trolls and bots and people being paid to basically put these narratives out into social media. Russia has also used it used it during the conflict in Syria. It's used it during the Ukraine war, but migration of people as a weapon, and try to push numbers of people into countries to also destabilize them. For example, during the Syria conflict, and this is some years ago now in Europe, it's been uncovered that Russia basically directed people into different countries in Europe, to Finland, to other places, to try to destabilize populations there, and then conducted a disinformation campaign that was supporting this effort. I was in Ukraine when Russia tried to take down the energy grid for the 28 or so million people who were living in Ukraine at the time. What that would do is take out the power, the heat, and the lights for millions of people. Ukraine, like Michigan, is cold. And if people lose all of that in the winter, they will not survive. And if that didn't happen, the UN estimated that 5 million people would become refugees. You would have 5 million people streaming into Europe, again, destabilizing, in some cases, countries that just couldn't necessarily take in that many people quickly in the population, under the context of how many Ukrainians they'd already taken in the war. So those are a couple more planes on which this war is being waged. It is a very serious war. When the war in Ukraine stops, this war will not end, because I believe what Putin's goal, based on my experience, is not actually only to take over Ukraine. That's definitely his immediate goal. But his real goal is to divide Europe and weaken the United States. And that's why when we negotiate with a negotiator, we need to understand what the goals of the other side is. And I think we have often failed to understand that Putin's goal is not a rational one, and it's not in our interest. His goals are antithetical to U.S. interests. And then just getting to your question on Slovakia, I think a big part of this, the situation in Slovakia, which has long been divided between East and West, unlike the Czech Republic, Slovakia was just happened to have a government at the time that it applied to NATO and the EU that was very transatlantic. But it spent a lot of its history with leadership that is actually very, I would say, not pro-transatlantic. And the Fico government right now is not pro-transatlantic. I can give you stories how Fico, when he was in opposition, used to pay for somebody to take pictures of everybody coming into my house as the ambassador's residence. And then he'd make up stories and have them put out in media that he controlled, which were crazy. And this happened over and over again. So these kinds of leaders exist, and they exist in Europe. I don't know that we're always so well equipped as Americans to beat back against that, but that's the situation that exists, that people believe these false narratives, and then we're stuck trying to defend ourselves. So I firmly believe we should try to be more on offense. I think it's hard for us because we're a country, and traditionally in my diplomacy, it would be hard to get a cleared statement out because we like to try to make sure it's true. And to do that often takes time and fact checking. In Ukraine, I was lucky because we were 7 hours ahead. And I said, they'd say, "Oh, Ambassador, you got to wait for Washington to okay this." I said, "I'm not waiting. We're 7 hours ahead. We're going to go. And if Washington's got a problem, they'll come back to us." Well, they never did, because we just had to do the best we could and make sure we were kind of putting ourselves on offense and not always on defense. But it's a very big war that's going on. And this war, as I think Ann Applebaum and others are putting, are kind of putting into an academic frame, is really between democracies and autocracies, and how we want to live and what kind of society do we want to live in.
I'm very glad to see so many, including some questions from students. So I'll get to that one in a second. But you referenced really the idea of leadership in your talk and the importance of leadership. So there's a question here. Do you ever disagree with President Volodymyr Zelensky about what Do you have any corrections that you would like the Ukrainian government to make, or is that an unfair suggestion during a time of war?
I think other leaders may have left, or maybe other people, anybody who cared about their own life would have probably left when the full-scale invasion started. It was clear that the goal was to kill the president and anyone around him. But he stayed, and he stayed, and he fought. So as a diplomat, of course, we're working in these foreign countries, but our mission is to protect and support the interests of the United States. So it's not a big secret. Is this public, or is this, how does this go out publicly, or is this just this group? I don't know. Well, it's not a big secret, but I had one area, there's some coverage. Yeah, I had one area that I disagreed pretty firmly with the president on, and that was an area that kind of got debated internally and externally. In general, I felt the fight for corruption was equally important to winning the war, that they had to do both, that it wasn't one thing before the other, that both were really important. Not everybody believed that. But I think in trying to protect the huge US taxpayer investment, my job was to make sure that not a single penny ever went astray. What I believed, if it did, that the support for Ukraine would collapse, and then the whole effort would not be successful. So to me, that was a very important goal, and I think a goal shared by the Ukrainian people. And we have seen now, time and again, through 2 revolutions and through some public protests that happened over the summer, that the Ukrainian people cared deeply about their Euro-Atlantic and their European trajectory, and that's what they're fighting for. And I'd say the people on the front lines believe they're fighting for their territory and their country, but also for their kids to have this future that they have long voted for in their votes and in their voice and in their protests. I think that's the future of Ukraine. It's a very strong, independent fight that I think they will continue. But it's not easy. It's not an easy road to take. And they need to just continue on that path.
And we have a question really about the student perspective and student aspirations. So what would you say to students who are hesitant to pursue careers in international relations because of the rise of autocracy? I think there are other challenges to a career in international relations you could certainly tell us about, but I'd like to take advantage of your presence here to really speak to the students.
A noble and honorable career path, and one that's not going away. And with the fact that we are such a powerful country, I mean, the US economy is a $30 trillion economy. We are the most powerful in the world. The EU is a $20 trillion economy. China is about $18 trillion. Russia's $2 trillion. So we should put it in that perspective. But I think this is going to be a job in terms of leading our tool of diplomacy. This front line of fighting for our values is going to be a job that is, well, as long as we have a United States, and we need the best people to go out and do it. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who was, in the world of diplomacy, he was our first diplomat. He was in France. He's known for many things, of course, his inventions and participation as one of our founding fathers. But something's very famous that often comes up is a quote that he gave when they were leaving, I think, the Constitutional Convention. I might not have the history completely accurate, but they're leaving. And someone yells at him do you have a democracy or a republic? I think that was it. And he says, it's a democracy if you can keep it. And so this is like a moment where, a couple hundred years later, this is the question, how do we keep it? Well, we support our values at home and we support them abroad. And that's what gives us power. It's not just because we're the biggest, most powerful. It's because people believe in the values that have given us such prosperity and security and success. And that's what I think we got to keep going. So yes, it's a great profession, and there's a lot of ways to contribute as a foreign service officer, in one of our other national security agencies, as an NGO, working in politics to promote this overseas or at home. There's tons of possibility, so I definitely encourage it.
So our time is waning. I want to make sure I get to maybe one more question about what people here can do, and then another question, at least one more question about how you view the war. So there's several questions along these lines, and so I'll just pick for the last one. Do you have any advice for the average American citizen for having a civilized discussion with others who refuse to consider other viewpoints? If conversations like this are unable to occur, how can progress be made? I think that's of particular relevance, unfortunately, for Ukraine. What is the role of a citizen in kind of public diplomacy as it regards to Ukraine, and how do we have conversations about the war?
As a professional diplomat, sometimes the challenge was always, how do you find that common ground? And I think it's trying to find that common ground, whether it's on foreign affairs issues like Ukraine, or whether it's on domestic issues. What's the common ground? I think on Ukraine, I think we can all agree that freedom is a value that is worth fighting for, and one that we share with the Ukrainians. I think everybody would agree with that. The question is, should we support them, and how? And sometimes it's a matter of coming to, rally around those things that we can agree on, and realizing that sometimes what we're disagreeing on is the way in which we would do such a thing. It's not as much, sometimes it is, but to my experience, it's often that we agree fundamentally on whatever the value is. The values of Americans, as a Midwesterner, as a Michigander, I think they're pretty simple, and they're pretty consistent. But how do we achieve that goal? And I think actually this is part of our problem right now in politics too, is that we're really focused on the how, but not the what. And I think we would do better if we focused on the what, and then we could have maybe a more civilized conversation on the how. But it's my deep belief on at least Ukraine and foreign policy that our power of leadership rests on the values. It does not rest on the fact that we just happen to be the biggest in the playground. It rests on the fact that people have respected the values that underpin our success. And respected, it's reason I spent 28 years, my only thing I can give my country, my professional life, waking up every day to think about how can I serve my country and fight for our values and stand up for our values. And how I remember even early in my career saying, thank goodness I'm not a diplomat from whatever country, because as a diplomat, you have to reflect your leadership's position. And I always felt under Democratic and Republican presidents that I was proud to be a representative of our country, of one that values a country of choice, where people come together not just because we're all from the same place, because we aren't, but believe in a set of values, and that's why we're here, and that's what binds us. And I think we got to remember that. And I feel like this moment, we just have to remember who we are.
In this vein, there's questions about how do we get good information about Ukraine, and I don't know if you feel comfortable speaking to that, but
Yeah.
What are your favorite sources for good news about Ukraine? Somebody asked about podcasts, but I think there's multiple ways to approach this. And then related to this, how do we combat domestic disinformation campaigns that serve to undermine the ideal of American involvement and preservation of peace and democracy in Europe?
Yeah. On how to find out what's going on in Ukraine, I would recommend a couple of news sources that are independent news sources. One's the Kyiv Independent, and you can read it without being a member. But if you want to join, I think they'd probably be delighted to have you, because a lot of their funding has gone away. Kyiv Independent is one reputable news source. Another one is called Ukrainska Pravda, and that has an English version as well. That's also a very reputable news source that long has been seen as accurate, also very on the forefront of fighting corruption. For American news sources, I really like ISW, Institute for the Study of War. That is a nonpartisan think tank that puts out detailed maps on the conflict. So if you want to see like what's happening, it also has very good analysis on Russia's hybrid war and how this is much more than just a land war. I think it's really excellent. A podcast I like is War on the Rocks. It's Michael Kaufman. He spends a lot of time out in Ukraine. Those are all really good sources. And I mean, I'm also a believer in getting sources from getting news from a lot of different places. And when I was in Ukraine, I actually had to read all the disinformation that was coming out. So I could know what was coming at me. So I know how I could push it back. And so I think that we're a little bit in an age where people might be watching, I don't know, one source of news. And I came up in my career, and I believe so now, it's really important to get my news from many different sources. So I encourage that for the younger folks especially. And sorry, there was a second part to that.
Well, I think you answered it. How do we combat disinformation?
Oh,
and
yeah.
The question is along these lines. I think you could speak to this in your role as ambassador. How did the department, the public affairs section in Kyiv combat disinformation that was taking place certainly even in Ukraine?
So this was always a challenge because in disinformation, it's very hard to get ahead of it because it's usually a bit overwhelming. But I always believed we should always try to play offense, not to be on defense, so that if it comes out, of course, we're going to come out. I never thought staying silent is a good idea. I always thought if we can correct it or push back on it, we always should. But also, I think we were, and I don't know if these programs all exist now, but we had a lot of ways where we would both be able to identify it and train others in identifying it. And I think that is something we could do in America, probably a little bit more, and also to be able to showcase where it's happening. Social media is one of the, wonderful way for people to be connected, but at the same time, it's like a hotbed of disinformation or bad information or misinformation. So all our kids, including my own kids, are getting information that way. That means you got to be particularly mindful to try to know your sources and basically know what sources are trustworthy and accurate.
Yeah, I always say read paid journalism.
Yeah. Yeah.
And look at people's credentials.
Yeah. But I guess if you read like I don't know what people read now here, if you read a national paper, but I like to read the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times, all of them, and the Financial Times too. So just think about, if you're reading just one, that's great, but you might pick another one that's kind of got a different viewpoint, and it might also help you look at problems or solutions or argue with someone if you want, a different perspective. Zaporizhia is in bad shape right now, yeah.
So one last question, I think that is, I hope a good way maybe to sum up or conclude our conversation. I've enjoyed the conversation immensely. I hope everybody has. And we're really glad to see so many faces here, some of whom I recognize, and it's great to see students lurking there in the back. So a final question. You stated that peace at any price is not peace at all. So what does a fair and just peace in Ukraine look like to you? And there's a PS more than just Russia leaving, obviously. And I think that's a good.
It's a great question to,
right?
yeah.
It should obviously begin there, but what does a post-war Ukraine look like?
Yeah. I will say what I think might be a realistic and just peace. And I think the problem I see is that it often starts with a discussion of territory. And from the beginning of any recommendation I ever gave as ambassador, I believe that the discussion needs to start with security. The first question for any Ukrainian is, how are they going to be secured? So nobody trusts what Putin would agree to or even sign up for or even have others say that they would support because they have very bad history on this. So the question really is, how do Ukrainians secure themselves? how do Ukraine's friends and partners help to ensure that security? I think that's the first question that has to be answered. When that question is answered, there can be a lot of negotiation on other issues, but that question's fundamental. There are some other ones as well that don't have anything to do with the territorial line. The abduction of children. The Ukrainians say 20,000 children have been taken from their families in Ukraine and given to Russian families. It's like unbelievable. As a mom, it's impossible to even imagine this, but this has happened. The return of prisoners of war that include many civilians as well. This is another huge piece for Ukraine. Justice for 150,000 people who had, I won't tell you how awful they are, but horrific things happened to them and their family members, you know, including murders, but including sexual assaults, including horrible things that one could only have imagined was from another century. Those are things that are very important as well to address and think about. And the order at which we should do it, in my view, is security first. And that would make it easier to get to a place where there could be some kind of agreement. But I also don't think Russia ever lives up to its agreements. So this means that we would need, in my view, to have either NATO or some coalition of the willing ready to ensure that whatever's agreed is actually holds. And that's not an easy prospect. But that's where this could be resolved, where this war could at least end. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. So Jakub Sim, I don't know, Professor Peril, would you like to say some concluding remarks or offer?
Yes, so just wanted to thank you on behalf of all of us here in the audience for your insights, for your willingness to come here, share expertise, wisdom with us. Thank you very much, Pastor.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.